All right, so welcome and thank you for attending today's proposals for resilient communities. My name is Nick Tan and I will be your host. I am hosting this session from Mill Bay on Vancouver Island, BC. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am on the traditional territory of the Malahat First Nations. The purpose of this session is to showcase proposals relating to housing and forest conservation. Each presenter will have 20 minutes to discuss their proposals and to answer questions and discuss any friendly amendments that you may want to suggest. I'll ask you that for this presentation, if you can mute yourself if you think you're going to create some background noise. But otherwise, if you have questions, feel free to enter them into the chat and I'll collect them for response by the submitter, or if the presenter is comfortable, you can just interject with your questions as they arise. At the end of each presentation, I'd like to run an anonymous poll just to gauge how you would vote. You don't have to participate, but your response, which I will be sharing with just the submitter in strict confidence, will be very helpful for them. And then after all the proposals have been presented, I will briefly discuss the voting process and what are your next steps. So does anybody have any questions?
So I have a question, and that is, we planned on leaving a 4 minute period at the end of our 20 minutes, after 16 minutes to 20 for questions, rather than take questions in the middle of the presentation. Is that what you have in mind?
I think with the small group that we have, we won't have a problem. At the end, I will be looping back just to give each presenter some time for final comments and answer questions. So at that point, I think we can definitely, I will be running the meeting longer as well. So if anybody has further questions, they can just stick around and ask.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. So with that, I'd like to allow each submitter to introduce themselves and their proposals. So first, we'll start with Kate.
Hi, so this is my 20 minutes now?
No, just as a brief introduction.
Okay,
so everybody just take a moment to introduce yourself, your proposal, and then I'll loop back to you, and then you can start your 20 minutes.
Okay, I'm Kate Chung. I'm in Toronto at the Toronto St. Paul's riding. My proposal is that universal design be made the basic standard in all building codes right across the country, federally and provincially. And I'll talk about the reasons when I get my 20 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Kate. And Braeden.
Yes, hi. My name is Braeden Soltys. My proposal is on the expansion of public housing and implementing some market regulations on the private housing sector. I'm from Toronto, which rightfully belongs to the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Wendat, and I'm happy to be here with everybody.
Fantastic. And Michael, Jenica, and Anne, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your proposal.
Thank you for hosting, Nick. I acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen speaking people. I am Jenica Wayman, co-author of the proposal for ecological forestry, along with my husband, Michael Coon. Michael was Director of Strategic Land Use Planning for the province of BC. Michael will present our proposal for Green Party Canada policy on promoting the ecological health of Canada's forests on privately owned and Crown land. Immediately following Michael, Anne Mortifee, Order of Canada Award recipient and founder of the Trust for Sustainable Forestry, will present her vision and successful story of conservation forest communities on privately owned land. Anne's presentation is not part of the GPC policy proposal for voting. It is an application of ecological forestry principles as a solution for the future of resilient ecological forest communities. Anne and Michael will each present for about 7 minutes, allowing 6 minutes for Q&A at the end of their presentations.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Jenica. And with that, what we'll do is we'll loop back to Kate. So Kate, I'll let you have the mic. I'll mute myself. And if we go up to the 20 minutes, I'll just give you a little nudge when there's about 2 minutes to go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So take it away, Kate.
So this proposal is similar to one that I presented to the Ontario Greens, which was accepted, was unanimously accepted. However, there was a problem. There wasn't quorum in the meeting, so I'm not quite sure what they're going to do to ratify this and other policies. So I got a little confused because the formatting of the proposals was different provincially and federally. So I'm going to speak off the cuff because I do this a lot. I'm the co-chair of the Accessible Housing Network, which is an organization of organizations in Ontario and across the country. We're trying to recruit more organizations because we're fairly new, which work with seniors and people with disabilities and who see the need for accessible design. And so what we're asking is that all building codes require that all new housing, at this point, we're focusing on multi-unit buildings, so apartments and condos, but we'd be very happy if it was for all housing, including single family and those dreadful townhouses with all the stairs. So we want all the new housing to be fully accessible. Universal design is the term that we've used, which means that the housing is livable for people of any age or any ability. Some people may have particular needs, which might go beyond what's called universal design, in which case they might have to have some more modifications made to the housing. But if you start with universal design, then anyone basically could live there with very little renovation required. Universal design in housing, if it's included from the planning stage, doesn't cost any more. CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, did a study, and they found that for apartments, you don't need any larger size. It's just how you lay out the design within the apartment, and therefore the cost is the same. And I mention this because builders and government keep saying, oh no, it'll cost too much. No, it has to be bigger to allow for wheelchairs or whatever. But it's not true. This is, we hear about old wives' tales. This is an old builder's tale. And so we're facing a lot of resistance from government and builders, whereas and people in the street say, oh, but I thought the law already said that housing had to be accessible. But there's actually no law in Canada requiring any housing to be accessible. The new National Housing Strategy aims for new housing that's public housing. I have to get it totally straight, that 20% be visitable or to some level accessible. That is interesting. Right after that housing strategy law was passed, the National Minister of Housing spoke at the announcement of a project in West End of Toronto and boasted that it was going to be 10% accessible. So this is a nightmare because as of 4 years ago, Statistics Canada said 22% of Canadians have a disability. And that's any kind of disability. They didn't specify what kind, but people with vision problems, people who have mobility problems, people who have difficulty with spatial orientation, whatever, any kind of disability, can live more easily in a universal design apartment. So for example, if you have a roll-in shower, a roll-out balcony, then anyone can get through and you're less likely to trip. A study was done in Australia and they found that people who had accessible design in their housing had fewer falls, fewer trips to hospital, needed less PSW help, personal care. They needed less in the way of household help. They were more able to increase their hours of work or work if they hadn't worked at all before. Their mental and physical health improved. So all around, if governments are worried about money, for housing that's built with government money, they're going to save money. And in fact, there is very sort of a funny fact that I read recently that if builders would make all the doorways wide enough for a wide wheelchair, they would use one less wall stud for every door. and therefore they actually save money. So we need to tell people this. The Raging Grannies loved it when they heard that. They have a song about studs that I will not repeat. But they really jumped on the point, and you could save money and save a stud. I got interested in this situation first about 35 years ago when I lived in a housing co-op where there was a little girl about 8 years old who used an electric wheelchair. And she couldn't go and play with any of the other kids because all the other townhouses had steps front and back. And I just thought how lonely she must be. I didn't know her personally. I just saw her in this large co-op. So I just decided in the back of my mind that someday I was going to change that. And since then, I've met so many people whose lives would be so much easier, so much better, so much happier and healthier if they had accessible housing. So for example, there's a young mother in Toronto whose 13-year-old son was now too heavy for her to lift. And she needed to get him in and out of the bathtub. But she lived in a rental co-op where they had done everything they could to help her, but there were not the supports in the ceiling of the bathroom to be able to install a lift. And that's all she needed, a support in the ceiling so she could have the lift so she could get him in the tub, because with his cerebral palsy, he had a lot of muscle spasm and he really needed to soak in a tub, not go in a shower. He couldn't walk and he couldn't talk. So in the end, when he turned 14, she had to put him in a group home. And she was very reluctant to do this because, of course, you don't know what kind of care your child is getting. And 14 is still a child. She was very worried about him. Luckily, the group home isn't too far from her place. But then, of course, COVID hit and no visiting. So if she had been able to keep him at home, she could have managed if she could have put in the lift to get him in and out of the bathtub. That's just one example. There's somebody else I know who was an active person. He got hit by a truck when he was out on his bike and became quadriplegic. And in a flash, he lost his home, he lost his marriage, and he lost his job. People don't think about this. People feel invincible, especially young people. They think that's never going to happen to them. And I'm finding that older people, strangely enough, and I can include myself in this, when I filled out the census form recently, did I have a disability? Because they asked. And I was going to say no, because of course your self-definition when you're growing up is I'm able-bodied. I don't have a problem, if that's the case for you. And then I realized, no, I've got a vision problem. I've got a hearing problem. I have hearing aids, so I can't see you or hear you if I don't have these. And I have a mobility problem. I have a knee replacement and I use a cane. So yes, so I ticked off those 3 disabilities, because I felt it was really important for the government to have a handle on how many people have various kinds of disability. That's where Statistics Canada gets their information from. So I know so many older people who refuse to admit that they have a disability when they can hardly walk. You see them on the street, they don't even want to use a cane. And life would be so much easier for all those people if their housing were accessible. I'm sure I've forgotten to say something. But I do want to add, this is really important. The human rights law and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities all say you cannot discriminate against anyone because of their disability. So all the laws in Canada do discriminate, and still the government refuses to act. And the biggest problem, in addition to this argument about cost, is that all the different levels of government argue against each other. So we really have to have the political parties stand up and say this can't go on any longer. The federal government, when we had a petition presented in the House of Commons, replied, the federal government has nothing to do with housing, which is like the biggest joke on earth, when they're responsible for Indigenous and military housing, and the CMHC controls funding for housing right across the country. Along with now the National Housing Strategy and the Accessible Canada Act. So how they could say they have nothing to do with housing is beyond me. So they passed the buck to the province, and the province says, we need to have the National Building Code lead so that all the provinces will make coordinate their housing building codes. And then, so they say we can't do it until the feds do it. And then you go to the city, and the city says, well, we can't do it until the province changes the building code. But the building code in Ontario only requires that 15% of new apartments be visitable. That means you can come in and have a cup of tea and use a washroom. You can't live there. It's not accessible enough. So we're dealing with the city, we're dealing with the province, we're dealing with the feds, who all blame each other, instead of sitting down together and saying, okay, how are we going to stop this roadblock? And we're not just talking about subsidized housing or nonprofit housing. We're talking about all housing, because there are people with lots of money, certainly adequate income, who can't find an accessible place to live. So for example, an 80-year-old retired school librarian spent thousands and thousands of dollars to renovate her condo in order to have it accessible enough for her wheelchair. She's post-polio. And she's been looking everywhere to find a condo that she could just buy that's accessible. Can't find one. So I think the myth about cost comes from the cost of renovations. It's very expensive to renovate, but it's no more expensive if you include accessibility from day one. It's very interesting that the Ontario Home Builders Association and the Canadian Home Builders Associations both have started training for their members on the very lucrative renovation of homes of people who have money, who want to be able to live in place and age in place. But they don't do training on how to build from scratch, from the beginning, from the plans, because they make more money if they renovate. It's very expensive to renovate any place. Anyway, I'm open for questions.
Well, Kate, you're one of the reasons why I came today. I'm a semi-retired OT. I've practiced occupational therapy since 1976. So I've been in more homes than any realtor. I challenge any realtor to come up with as many homes they've been in as I've been in. So I've seen every single problem that you've mentioned and had to problem solve lots of very, very difficult situations. So yeah, I think this is a very, very much needed policy. In terms of aging in place, when we bought our place in Shawnigan, I think my husband, who's younger than me, thought I was absolutely nuts because I was just going around. I wasn't going to buy a place where I couldn't see a part of the porch where I could put a lift, where I couldn't put a ramp from the carport to the to the house, where doorways weren't wide enough. And he thought, "What are you on about?" And it's just that I've seen so many people who have reached a point in their life where maybe they have a diagnosis, they have to be in a chair, and all of a sudden they have to move. And I didn't want to have that happening to us. But not everybody comes with that lens. And then, like you said about that person who is looking for a place, the friend you have who's post-polio, looking for a place and can't find one. So, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. When we did put cement, we put cement all around our house so we weren't constantly tracking in gravel. There was a section where probably most people would have put stairs. And I said, no, we're not putting stairs, we're putting a ramp, because if I'm ever in a chair, I want to go all the way around my house in my chair. So, again, it didn't actually end up costing us any more to do that, but I had the lens to choose to do that, and builders don't have that lens. So unless there's a standard, it won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a cartoon that's hilarious, but right on about the issue you're talking about with ramps and getting around. It shows these kids who want to get into a building, and the caretaker is starting to shovel the steps, and the kid in the wheelchair says, "But if you shovel the ramp first, all of us can get in."
Exactly. Yeah.
Kate, just to say, walking the dog this morning, I came across people that I quite often see, and one of them, an older lady, was pretty upset because her son, who's 56 years old, had suddenly gone blind.
Mm-hmm.
And it just brought, I mean, this, what you're talking about, I've been and was involved with building for commercial, but for some years. I'm also thinking of doing a seniors co-housing at some point. So is it possible you could point me to some design guidelines and that sort of a thing that would cover what you're talking about?
You could get in touch with us. Unitarian Commons co-housing, I'm on the board there. We're wanting to build a condo that is co-housing, not just for seniors, but for people of all ages and all abilities. So we have a website, Unitarian Commons. If you look up Unitarian Commons, I think it's .ca. But if you just put Unitarian Commons into your search, and okay, and then you'll see us. You can see how to get in touch with us, and I monitor that email, so I could send you some information. Now, one place you could see a little bit of information along these lines is the Daniels Corporation. They have accessibility, what's it called? Accessibility design program. This is just the little foot in the door, the teeny thing that we and other people have talked to them. And so I mentioned that 15% of units have to be visitable in Ontario. So what they have said is when they are selling a new project and you're buying from plans, if you want one of those units that they have decided where they are in the building, which ones they are, if you want one of those 15% to be fully accessible, they will make it fully accessible for you at no extra cost, except for the kitchen, which they charge an extra $5,000. It's actually a very good deal. But in their information that they have on their website, it shows you, it gives you sort of a computer model of rolling through the apartment. It gives a list of the features that they put. So that is very helpful. If you can't find it, if when you email us, you say you couldn't find it, I'll look up the website for you.
I think I've got it already here.
Got it there?
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. It's good. And then I would suspect that any of the co-housing facilitators that are around would have some information. Certainly that have you seen the book about seniors co-housing?
Yes.
Yeah. The trouble, I haven't seen that particular book. I've seen their previous book. And I don't know how much they think about accessibility in that.
Well, that's, I hadn't until this, so thank you very much for that.
Okay,
And
I think it's really important. Yeah.
I will.
So you just, what we're doing, our very first project for Unitarian Commons in Toronto, there's a congregation, a very small Unitarian congregation. And by the way, we say Unitarian, but anybody can live there. It's not just for Unitarians. We just happen to be the ones that started this organization. It's going to be very small, 9 units on 3 floors at the back of their old house that's used as a church, but there'll be an elevator and all the units will be fully accessible. They'll all have roll-out balconies and roll-in showers. So that's going through the city approval process now, and we hope that it'll be approved. You just never know till the end of the process, and things are really slow here. But if we get that going, that'll be our very first success. And we've been working for about 6 years to try to get something going, but the trouble with trying to develop something that's different is you need money, and lots of us own houses or condos now, so we certainly have the money to buy, and we're doing it as a condo because we don't have money to build rental. What we would love is to have a builder build and we just bring the buyers, but that's another whole problem. So again, if we could get the law changed, then the builders have to build fully accessible anyway, and then that's one step along the way, and there's add the co-housing element.
Okay. Nick, just if I can chime in here, I did go on to look at the voting site. You'll come up with a ballot that's got a huge long ballot because there's 90 things on it. You can hit continue, and then it shows you how you voted, and then you can confirm it or not. And unfortunately, it doesn't say, like, you can't go halfway through and have it save your ballot, so you come back to it, right?
Perfect. I'll repeat that when I get to that slide in the presentation.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks.
Right, and
I may have to go at some point.
Okay.
This has been phenomenal, so I'm gonna see if I can hang in there. Thanks.
Well,
Awesome.
Bob,
Thanks.
before you go, I'll just get in touch with me. I've actually got a universal design textbook.
Oh, cool.
It's from a woman who that's her whole consulting business in Australia, and she's a professor at the university in Australia as well. And so I mean, universal design is universal design. So the fact that it's from Australia shouldn't make a difference, but it's got all of the standards in there, like for the height for light switches and the height for electrical outlets and door widths and ceiling heights and everything in it.
Thanks,
What's the
Ken.
title of the book?
Well, that's the problem because it's downstairs in my office and you've got me upstairs in my my glorified closet, as my husband likes to call it. It's a third bedroom that seems to have just become mine. But I will find it while you guys are talking about something else and bring it up.
Okay, or you could send the information to Nick and he's got all of our email addresses.
Yeah, and I can put it in the chat, but it
Yeah.
requires going
Oh, yeah.
downstairs.
Mhm.
Fantastic. So that's 20
Thanks.
minutes. So I'd like to try something new here. So I'm going to try launching that poll that I mentioned just to gauge people's interest in how they would vote. With this recording, I don't know if it's actually, the results are going to appear in the recording. I hope not. So I'll have to vet that later. But I'm going to launch the first poll.
Yeah, I think it'll just show the totals.
Okay, well, I don't want the totals to be shared with anyone except,
Oh, okay.
for example, you, Kate, but you should see a
I don't
prompt on your
mind if
screen.
everybody sees the totals.
And if you can just check off whether you would green support this proposal, yellow, you'd like to see certain amendments, yellow, you'd like more information, red, you do not support this proposal. I hope I see 0% for that, or abstain, I will not vote on this proposal. So I'll just give it another 5-10 seconds. Oh, I see everybody's voted. So I'm just going to end the polling. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to share the results, but I will just say it's very, very good. I think I can at least say that. All right, so fantastic. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you, everybody.
And so next, Braeden, you are up. I'm going to change the slide and then you have 20 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Yes, hello everyone. So this is a policy that does a couple of different things. So I'll kind of just read through it and then I'll explain some of the rationale and the logic behind it. So the proposal is the GPC supports regulations such as caps on rent and land ownership, targeted taxation to combat speculation and inclusionary zoning, federal transfers to provinces and municipalities to fund the creation, renovation, and regular maintenance of publicly owned and operated housing, and also expropriation and acquisition of land for use as public housing. So basically, the idea behind this is to take a non-market approach to solving the housing crisis. Currently in the GPC, there exists a plethora of policies that interact with private investment and that also boost the cooperative sector and strengthen the power of land trusts, which are also all fantastic, great things. But when I was looking through the policy booklet for the Green Party, I noticed that there wasn't any language around public housing at all. And Canada has a kind of long history with public investment into housing that unfortunately was kind of chipped away, and the big chip away happening in the 90s with the Chrétien government. And so what this kind of proposal is calling for is kind of a renaissance, almost, so to speak, in public housing. I'll go through some more specific numbers that are more Toronto centric, because that's just where I'm based in. But the kind of issue permeates throughout all of Canada. So currently in Toronto, there is a wait list of about 86,000 families that are looking to have subsidized public housing. On top of that, there is a huge backlog of repairs for the existing public housing stock to the tune of something like $3.1 billion. The federal government in the 2021 budget plans to give $1.9 billion, but there's still that around $2 or $1.5 billion gap for Toronto specifically. That's not even touching Vancouver or Montreal or anywhere else in the country. So the benefits of public housing or non-market housing, as opposed to solely focusing on supporting the private market, is that the public market or the private market tends to absorb the costs or absorb the reduction in prices eventually over time. What non-market solutions will seek to do is to try and curtail that eventuality that happens just through private investment and private development. I kind of want to give a bit of a snapshot just to where the kind of current crisis is and how it is exactly a pan-Canadian thing. So it's not just a Toronto thing, it's not just a Vancouver thing, but it's kind of happening everywhere. And I will acknowledge these are more rental focused, and that's mostly just my background. I'm a renter, always have been a renter, unfortunately, always likely will be a renter. But the numbers kind of look like this. I'm using the average 1-bedroom rent that's kind of identified in a bunch of different numbers depending on which source you look at. For the proposal itself, I use the CMHC numbers that are found in its 2020 rental market report and its 2021 Northern rental market report. But I'll also use kind of different numbers for here as well. The problem with the CMHC numbers is that they tend to miss units like basement apartments or other units that typically aren't included in the normal surveys that CMHC does. So in Calgary, the average 1-bedroom apartment is around 1,100. Now, when you factor in a full-time minimum wage worker's potential maximum monthly income, it ends up being, I lost all my percentages here, but it ends up being around 45% of a minimum wage worker's income. In Halifax, it goes to 49% of their income, Montreal, 37% of their income, Regina, 52%, Toronto, 62%, Vancouver, 58%, Winnipeg, 52%, and Yellowknife, 61%. And this isn't just a big city issue. It impacts London, Ontario, which I'm from originally. It impacts Lethbridge, Alberta. It impacts Charlottetown. It impacts pretty much everywhere across the country. Kind of losing my train of thought here. So why are these numbers important? The CMHC classifies housing as being affordable if it is no more than 30% of your income. So basically, there's a huge gap between what around 10% of the population can actually afford and what they are currently paying. What typically tends to work in public housing, for those who are not as familiar with it, is that they use a model known as rent geared to income, which kind of caps a chargeable rent at 30%, typically. So that is kind of the main reason for why pushing for public ownership of housing as much as I am. And in terms of the regulations on top of that, there is a current lack in targeting private equity firms who are just kind of going around and buying up thousands of units across the country. CapREIT just recently bought something like 1,300 or 1,700 individual units. And what these monopolizations of units tends to do is it leads to dramatic increases in rent. It leads to poor unit quality. It leads to a whole host of problems for folks in the lower income end of the population. I'm trying to think, I've probably forgotten a million things. I'll touch quickly on the kind of third point, which is around expropriation and acquisition of land. This is an idea that is kind of meant to go around what tends to be a criticism of a lot of building projects, which is that it takes time. To expropriate or acquire a lot of existing private units or office spaces, which I think the Liberal government is currently considering doing, to then convert into affordable public housing or just affordable housing in general, skips a lot of the time that it would take and the money that it would take to start these projects from the ground up. So yes, are there kind of any questions at this point? I know I've kind of fired a lot of information, a lot of numbers very quickly. But are there any questions that I can attempt to answer?
Just a comment. In Europe, it's much more common to rent. And, in a way, I feel that the focus on home ownership in North America is a settler attitude. People came here and we're looking to own land initially and getting their land grants. So we have this attitude that I need to own land, which of course is total opposite to the indigenous approach to land. And in Europe, is it Vienna, I think, where the majority of the housing is owned by the city and people are long-term tenants in the housing owned by the city. And I really, really am furious every time I see publicly owned land, whether the city or the province or the feds, being sold to anyone. I think it should be made part of a community land bank, whether that's operated by the city or a nonprofit, doesn't matter to me. I just don't want the cost of land to be included in the cost of housing, whether it's ownership or rental. It should be, the land should be leased, not sold.
I totally agree. Don't have much to say other than, yeah, I think Vienna has something like 60% of its housing stock is leased out that way. And I think in Taiwan, they have something, even more huge number, something like 90 or 95% of their housing stock is owned and leased out by the government in a very creative and innovative way. I had a thought just now I wanted to address. There also sometimes tends to be a lot of negative views towards public housing in Canada. It has a bit of a stigma around it. Part of this comes from the kind of chronic underfunding of the area that has led to some of the more decrepit natures of the units, which is why this proposal calls for the regular maintenance and renovation of the existing ones, as well as the creation of new ones. But I also just kind of want to say, I come from an arts background, so I think this is also an interesting opportunity to kind of create new developments that take in beauty and aesthetics, as well as environmental stewardship and other types of aesthetic components to it that often are left out from building opportunities. So that's just another thought that could go along with this. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions?
I have a question. Could you explain more what targeted taxation to combat speculation would involve?
Sure. So that could be something like, taxing capital gains on the sale of properties, whether it be, properties that are not the primary residences, or even excluding some secondary residents. There's no point in targeting people who own cottages by the lake. But I'm thinking more, taxing the large real estate firms that buy up swaths of single homes in suburbs or in condos in downtown. Could also be empty homes taxes. The federal government is currently exploring one of those right now, though, and this is just my personal opinion, I think it's a little weak. There could be multiple property buyers taxes, where if you buy your fifth or sixth house, then there's a levy charged to that. Or there's multiple different approaches one could take, but those are kind of the ideas that at least I had in mind when drafting this.
Okay, well, thank you for that sharing, Braeden.
Thank you.
I've been trying to get city councilors to put a surtax on the property tax of any housing valued at more than, whether it's $1 million or $2 million, but let's get an extra tax from this ludicrously expensive, luxurious housing that's being built in the Toronto area. And a lot of it's not even occupied. It's being bought by people in other countries to have an investment here where it's not likely to be destroyed in war. And it's just another pied-à-terre that they have, in addition to places everywhere. There's a house up the street from me that is a luxurious mansion that was totally millions of dollars into it, and nobody lives there. It's got a gate around it, and that's it.
there's an interesting phenomenon in Toronto that the city council just passed a resolution combating. It's a phenomenon called ghost hotels. I'm not sure if that's a term being used in Vancouver circles as well, where there are entire condo buildings that are just being bought up and turned into kind of unofficial Airbnbs. The city council just passed a bunch of reforms that are requiring people to have particular licenses, banning Airbnbs that are not primary residences. So I wonder if that could be extrapolated to kind of federal regulations as well, but I'm not entirely sure. Bob, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Braeden. So I get caps on rent. That seems pretty straightforward, but caps on land ownership, what kind of things did you have in mind there?
Well, Scotland was looking at laws such as this. They haven't passed anything officially yet, but the Scottish Green Party drew attention to this effort that was taking place, I think, in 2015 or 2016, that looked to place a cap on the amount of land that I believe is certain estates or certain families could hold. Because in Scotland, 50% of all land is owned by like 400 families or something like that, or 400 people. So a cap on land ownership would kind of be value-based, ideally. So it's not. It's kind of value-based, and it targets basically the amount of land that an individual or company or family could own, ideally, something like that.
Okay. Do you know Darcy Lanthier?
I don't know. I've seen names cropping up in. Yeah,
she had something she did in PEI that was really interesting to do with rental, and it was a maximum on the amount that a renter or a person that was renting could increase the rent, and if it went over a certain, it managed to cap the rental. In other words, I hadn't heard about it before, so might be worth dropping her an email sometime and just asking her about it. It was obviously have forgotten the details, but it was a super interesting kind of thing, and it's apparently saved renters quite a few dollars over the last few years.
Well, the idea around a cap on rent is based off of the Berlin rent cap that was attempted I think it was passed in 2019. And there were some arguments over jurisdiction that ended up quashing it. But it was a very interesting piece of reform where it had a range of chargeable rent that depended on things like square footage, on how modern appliances were, a whole bunch of other types of variables that seemed to do quite well for renters there. And it lasted for about a year or two. So that's kind of what this was based on, but it sounds like that's something. Said her name was Darcy?
Yeah, Lanthier. If you want to email me, I can
Sure.
Connect her with you. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I was going to say, sorry.
No, continue.
Yeah, I was going to say that we have a building next door to the condominium that I've been renting in, and it's an identical building to our building, but 90% of it is owned by people outside of the country. And so they get on the association. And what's happened to that building, we've been watching it just decay with problems of, the roof, it needs a new roof, it's got plumbing problems. And the people who live here, they have no say because the other people have taken over the, what is it called? The association that handles it. So every time they say we need a new roof, they say not yet or not now. And then when things get bad enough, in certain of the units, they sell them off. So there's been a huge outcry, and I know that the government's trying to, or our local government, to do something about that. But the problems become really dramatic for the people who own, and now they can't sell their their property because people don't want to be in that building.
Hmm.
Whereas ours, that has a strong association and everybody lives there, pretty much, it's in good shape. So it is a really big problem, and I'm really commend you for doing the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's tricky, especially with I'm not sure the story of this building in particular, if it's, you know, individual foreign owners or if it's equity firms that are buying it up, but it's difficult when those types of situations occur.
Yeah.
So
Nick, I saw you.
I'll
Sorry.
say, Braeden, are you familiar with the speculation tax that British Columbia introduced a couple of years ago?
Yeah, fairly, or a little bit, yeah.
So the point is that every property owner in the province gets a letter every year from the provincial government, and they have to state whether this property is their primary residence, and if it's not, whether or not it's rented. Okay, and if it's not rented, then the owner would be subject to a speculation tax.
Yeah,
So
that
that's
sounds like something that could for sure be implemented on a federal level, I'd imagine.
mhm.
And it was something that I had looked into when crafting this, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost at the 20-minute mark. Are there any last-minute questions before we switch over to the next presenter? If not, I just wanted to add a comment of my own. A couple months ago, I emailed the local housing society and asked them, if we eliminated down payments, would that help solve the housing crisis? And their answer was no. And pretty much everything that Braeden has mentioned in his proposal is exactly what they were calling for to help deal with the housing crisis. So I think this proposal is absolutely on point based on what the people on the ground here are saying. So that's fantastic, Braeden.
Cool. Thank you, Nick.
And so with that, I'm just going to quickly change my slide for one moment, and then we're going to be, we'll be switching the screen sharing. So Jenica, Ann, and Michael will be taking over. So Michael, as we had practiced very briefly, did you want to try to share your screen? And then you'll see my slide, which has your proposal, disappear while you do your proposal. Oh, and Kate, sorry, you have your hand up. And you're muted.
We're gonna do a poll on Braeden's
sorry.
proposal.
Yes, so
I was wondering about the poll as well.
Before we do that, okay, for those who joined, I'm running an anonymous poll just to gauge the people's response to the proposals. You do not have to participate, but the results, which will be shared only with, in this case, Braeden, will be very helpful to him. So I'm going to switch the poll and I'm going to launch it. So you will see a prompt. And as I mentioned before, you have 5 options. Green, I support this. Yellow, I'd like to see certain amendments. Yellow, I'd like more information. Red, I do not support this proposal. Or abstain, I will not vote on this proposal. So I'll just give it a little bit more time. And also remember, on the screen that I'm sharing and at the end of the proposal, I will have all the contact information. So you can grab Braeden's email right now, or you can wait till the end of the proposal and presentation and grab his information then. And I encourage you to reach out. So I'll just give it another few more seconds just to see if we can collect any more votes. And then I will end the poll. And there we go, 1 minute. So thank you very much for your input. And thank you for reminding me about the poll. And now our last presentation, that will be Ann, Jenica, and Michael. So Michael and Ann, if you want to unmute yourself. And then Michael, yes, as I was mentioning before, if you could do your screen share and you should override my presentation.
So can you see that now?
Fantastic. I do. I hope everybody else does. If people cannot see Michael's screen, which currently has a Word doc open that says promote the ecological health of Canada's forests, please let us know by just unmuting yourself or mentioning something in the chat. Otherwise, Michael and Ann, you will be presenting. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much. We see the Green Party as the ecological champions of Canada. And we want to see the Green Party supporting the adoption of ecological forestry principles and practices in the management of both public and private forest lands across Canada. This will prioritize the preservation, the restoration and maintenance of old growth forests as key to forest ecosystem health. The objective in doing this is to ensure that Canada's forest ecosystems retain their natural ecological structure and provide a full range of ecological services, and where currently damaged, are restored to their natural condition. This will involve a massive change to forest management from a timber-based focus, as where it is currently, in which ecological health is seen as a constraint on the harvest, to an ecologically based focus with timber as one of many benefits. The benefits of having this form of forest management is that forest ecosystems will continue to provide ecosystem services, such as purifying the air we breathe, our drinking water, fostering biological diversity, managing carbon sequestration and storage, providing resilience to climate change, which I think we can all appreciate given the heat waves we've been having, and offering spiritual sustenance to the people of the country. Functioning forest ecosystems will provide economic benefits from truly sustainable management and harvesting of forest resources according to ecological principles and practices. The application of these ecological forestry principles and practices could include implementation of the following measures. First of all, an end to clear-cut logging, and the end to the replacement of public biodiverse forests with monoculture tree farms. It will involve collaboration with First Nations in the development and implementation of forestry policy and practices. The establishment of education centers where foresters can be trained or retrained in ecological forestry principles and practices will be necessary to broaden the knowledge base of those people that are professional forest managers. We want to ensure that new standards are set by the Canadian Standards Association to ensure that only those forestry companies that practice ecological forestry are eligible to be certified by CSA as sustainable. We would want the federal government to provide conservation financing to First Nations holding timber tenures, so that those First Nations can develop other economic and ecological alternatives to harvesting their old growth. We want to stop the current practice of spraying toxic pesticides on the forests in order to preserve the fungal mycelial networks and pollinators that are essential to biodiversity and are being destroyed by these toxic chemicals. And finally, for my part, I just say that we would like the federal government to provide compensation or some other form of economic benefits to purchase back the timber tenures currently held by logging companies, so that these can be reallocated to First Nations and other communities across the land. So that's my part of the presentation, and now I would like to turn it over to Anne to speak about conservation forest communities.
You know, when you fly over British Columbia now and a lot of other provinces, BC it has massive patches where floods are happening, the soil is eroding, the clear cuts are everywhere. I want to address particularly, though, on this one, not so much the Crown lands on my part of the thing, but we created an organization called the Trust for Sustainable Forestry to bring about having a really clear look at what's happening with privately owned forest lands. I feel very passionate about this because I don't think there's ever been a time when the will of the people is turning towards protecting our forests, mainly because of climate change. We're seeing massive clear cuts all over the province, and we really feel we've come up with a model for at least around small towns and large cities where we can start to preserve some of our forests through a vision of conservation forest communities as a socially, economically, and environmentally responsible way to maintain forests on privately owned lands. Our objective is to ensure that owners of privately forested lands have a viable option that will maintain the ecosystems of those forests. One of the things that happens in Canada is, especially in British Columbia, is there is very little governmental oversight of forest harvesting on private lands. Old growth forests, second growth, and third growth forests are being clear cut with little, if any, regard for value other than financial. And it's at the expense of climate change. We have a tremendous loss of diversity. The extinction of species and their habitat is rampant all over the province and country. The degradation of our groundwater is happening because we're losing the filtration that happens through the roots of the trees. And our old growth, ancient endangered old growth forests are being cut down. Some of those trees are like 1,000 years old. They are magnificent. And the way they take care of absorbing the carbon and transforming it into oxygen, the way they filter the water, filter the air, we have no idea what those old growth trees give us, not only spiritually, but energetically. Our forests are considered resource bases, and that's all. They're not considered life givers, and that's what they actually are. So the cutting of these forests has really led to so many problems for the communities that are around them that need to deal with a range of problems, including the degradation of their water and the quality of their water, flooding, loss of topsoil. So many problems are created. In many cases, forests are being converted, once they're clear cut, into 5 to 10 acre lots, which are just stumpage, and they're sold to create our subdivisions. And then they dig up all the roots, they put in the roads, and then they start planting other trees. So we're seeing such a tragedy in our forests. So what we did is several of us got together to create the Trust for Sustainable Forestry. And in the process of doing that, we created a land zone. And the land zone is called Community Land Stewardship. It's the CLS zone, which specifically allows and provides rules that would govern conservation forest communities. And this is what we did. Very often in a private land, 1,000 acres, 150 acres, 400 and whatever acres will come up for sale. And usually the only ones bidding on that land are clear-cut loggers. So people who own forested lands have really no option but to sell them to clear-cut if they need to make money. There's no viable way that at this time where they can make money on their land by selling it other than to clear-cut loggers. So the vision we came up with was to create these conservation forest communities. The CLS zone, what it does is it allows for one house per 10 acres, but rather than chopping the forest up into 10-acre lots, you become a part of a community that stewards the land. So the actual home site, so for instance, next door on it's now the Everwoods community, it started out with 150 acres. It came up for sale. It was going to be clear cut, and our first conservation community we built there. What we did was, if we can have one house per 10 acres, we had 15 houses on this 150 acres. We clustered them. That means that the roads, we need we almost no roads because they're clustered little hamlets like in the old way they used to do in Europe. And so that it reduces the infrastructure, it reduces the roads, it allows for the clustering. And on the land next door, we literally protected 95% of the forest. And people are living very happily in a community that is vibrant and caring for this forest. So they live in a park forever. We later on moved to the Cowichan district, and we purchased 1,000 acres. And there we did the same thing. You covenant the land so that it's protected in perpetuity. That we chose that particular piece of land because there were one of the very last herds of the Roosevelt elk. They migrate through that property spring and fall in order to get to the Shawnigan Lake. And we preserved their corridor. We preserved the riparian zones. Everything protecting water is preserved. And then those areas where you can have ecoforestry, very, very carefully ecosystem-based forestry, where you take care of the whole property, where people can still be harvesting. And that's where the re-education of loggers could be. The land goes on in perpetuity. You never take more than 50% of the annual incremental growth, meaning how much a tree puts on, and they have a way of figuring how they do that. And so it's a way of taking care of everything. For us, what happened was that when we brought this before the regional district, it was so popular that the Comox Stratford Strathcona Regional District said, this is one of the most creative, sustainable visions to appear that I've seen. And they were so excited about it that even the Cowichan Regional District, what they did was they now use the community land stewardship as their baseline zoning benchmark for development of lands in their region because of how they protect water and habitat for animals and all these other things. So it's a way that people who own forest land and cannot afford to donate it to a land trust or donate it to the government, what they have an opportunity to do is to create one of these small conservation communities, and it pays for the land. It pays more than what you would take off in the wood. And people then can live in a situation where they have, we usually build into it small agricultural areas so that it can support their community. Kate, what you were saying, one of the big difficulties we ran up against was the exact same thing, that the municipal, the federal and the provincial governments have such differing ways of handling things. So the fire is handled there and the roads are handled there and the water's handled there, and something else is, you have about 15 different areas you have to work with, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. But when it comes to a clear-cut logger coming in, it's very easy to say, we'll clear cut, then we'll cut it up into 10-acre lots, and we'll sell a house with a whole bunch of stumps on it. And they can get that through in 6 months. Whereas for us, it is years of hard work for them to even get their mind around us actually trying to preserve our forests. So we are very, very, very keen for the Green Party to look very seriously at our forests. Our forests are so much more to the world than most of our resources, because really they are the lungs of the planet at this point. And we're getting rid of them very, very fast. And we're seeing, especially in the West Coast, we're seeing terrible changes. I mean, we're having heat domes, you know, temperatures we haven't ever seen before here. And a lot of it, if you're in a forest, the forest is keeping the temperature down. It's taking care of the ground. It's taking care of all the mycelium and so forth that are living in the ground. We really have to take our forests profoundly seriously. And we feel that our vision for ecoforestry and for the conservation communities is a really viable and exciting way to protect, especially around cities and towns, is where you would use this model, but it helps to protect other areas of the forest. So that's our vision. And we know for sure that the model, it's in direct opposition to the suburban sprawl that is happening everywhere, where everyone owns their own piece of property, divides up the woods so that the habitat disappears completely for the animals. And it's just we need to be a part of the ecosystem, not the abusers of it. So that's our vision, is for these forest community conservation communities that help to protect the water, the habitat, and create really good homes where we have communities living together where they can be self-sufficient to some degree. In other words, little local markets and things like that. So that's our vision. And we're really hopeful that the Green Party will take forests as one of the most central, important things to be able to keep our world healthy and to see us into this next time. And I must say that right now in British Columbia, because of the Fairy Creek issues where our old growth is just being cut down, there, you know, a log that's 1,000 years old is not thought of as anything more than just a couple of houses that you can build. So it's brought attention from around the world. And in BC, I would have to say 80% of people, of the population in BC, is right on board with stopping this clear-cut logging, especially of our old growth trees. So that's our presentation about our conservation and our ecoforestry. If there anybody wants to ask questions.
I have to go. I actually had to run real quick then, but as I was doing my little errand, my chore, I thought I would change my t-shirt. Do you want to stop sharing the screen there for a sec?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, hi, man.
Hi.
All right. So yeah, so I changed my t-shirt for you. So I bought this one up.
Very handsome.
Bought this one at Fairy Creek.
Hey, what a guy. All right. Thank you, Bob.
Okay. I wanted to share that before I took off. But thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks, Nick, for organizing things, and must run.
Okay, Bob. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Amalia.
Hi there, everyone. I'm just going to quickly start sharing my screen again, which will put the proposal back online on screen, as well as Michael and Jenica's contact information. So if you can just bear with me for a second. So hopefully, can everybody see the slide where it has the name at the top, G21P049?
Right.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So we just have a minute left in this 20-minute allocation. Does anybody else have questions? And just note that I'm just going to be talking about the voting process. a little bit, but I will loop back to all the presenters again. So if people have any questions and the presenters have final remarks, this is not your only opportunity to engage. Okay, so with that, thank you very much, Michael, Jenica, and Anne. So what I'd like to run a poll. I just remembered on my own. So what we've been doing at the end of each proposal is running a poll where you can choose to vote if you'd like. It's an anonymous poll where the results will be shared with the presenters. It will help them understand the strength of their proposal. So I'm going to launch this poll right now. Again, it is anonymous and totally voluntary. So you should see the screen pop up. Green, I support this proposal. Yellow, I'd like to see certain amendments. Yellow, I would like more information. Red, I do not support this proposal. And abstain, I will not vote on this proposal. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Perfect, I have all the votes in. So thank you very much. I'll share that with Jenica, Michael, and Anne. And finally, I would like to talk about what's the next step for you. So after hearing all about all these great presentations, what do you need to do? And so I'm just going to quickly walk you through how to vote. So what you need to do first is to check your email for an online ballot. So for example, I received mine on July the 12th, and the subject line was your ballot, the 2021 Federal Council, Young Green Council elections, and proposal prioritization. Check your spam box if you did not receive it. In there, you will find a link to the voting site, as well as a password that is unique to you to register your vote for the different councils as well as the proposals. So what you'll want to do is click on the link, enter your password. You'll see a very long screen where you'll see all the voting options. For the proposals, you want to check off green, yellow, red, or abstain. So green is you support this. Yellow has dual meaning. You either want to see more information or you have certain amendments that you would like to see. Red is you do not support the proposal, and abstain is you're not voting on it. When you've completed that entire form, then you can hit continue at the bottom of the screen, where it will just provide a review of what you voted for, and then you can submit. And once you submit, that's it. There are no changes. So make sure that you're prepared to do the entire vote when you access the website, and that you are very sure about what you want to vote on. And in this screen, I just wanted to give you an example of this is what a full proposal will look like. Shameless plug, that is my proposal there. So you'll see the name of the proposal, a link to the full proposal on the Green Party website, and just be aware that you probably need to be signed in before you click on this link, or you will get an error message that pops up. And then you will be able to choose one of the 4 options that I mentioned. Does anybody have any questions about that? So this is all part of something called the Bonsor process, because we have such a huge number of proposals. I believe the count was at about 90 the last time I checked. This will help people, will help the policy committee figure out which proposals should be passed on to the next stage, what needs some tweaking, and what probably isn't going to be a really viable proposal when it goes to the general membership for voting. And so with that, just looping.
I had a question about that, the proposals again, another question.
Sure.
So I understand, is it just like when they get all of the results in from the poll, and the green, the ones, everything, all the greens are counted, they're only going to adopt the top 15, I think, greens into policy. Is that correct?
You know what? I haven't been able to attend all the policy meetings. I've joined the early ones, but the later ones I haven't been able to attend, and I really wish Bob was still here.
Because
I don't have an answer for that. They had talked initially. There was a 15 proposal limit. I believe they scrapped that because of the huge number of proposals. So really, this is a prioritization vote. This is not a final vote, but it will just help them organize and figure out what's the strength of each individual proposal.
So it's not, you think that when we fill in our ballots, it's not our final chance? There'll be like another opportunity to vote on all the green ones, you think?
Yeah, so my understanding, so we're recording this, so anybody who's watching recognize that I'm qualifying what I'm about to say. My understanding is that this is merely to prioritize, to help categorize these proposals, and then proposals that I think have strength will then go on for final voting. If you end up with a proposal, for example, where everybody votes red and they do not support it, I'm not sure exactly what the process is, but my understanding is that it will not go to the biannual general meeting in August. So if you want more information, I'll just make a note for you, Kim. And
yeah, I just haven't had time to research that, and I'm responsible for sending, the emails out to all of our EDA, and so I'd really like to know that what I'm telling them is the right thing. And I've been so busy with other stuff, I haven't had a chance to find out those answers.
Absolutely, I will try to find that answer for you and get back to you.
Good morning, Kathy.
Does anybody else have any questions about the voting process? At least the Bonsor one, the Bonsor prioritization vote. Okay. If not, before I loop back to our presenters, I just wanted to plug that we do have another session tomorrow, same time, different registration link. And tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, we will be having 3 more presentations under the Resilient Communities banner. There will be one on maximum wage, one about aligning Canada's constitution with UNDRIP, and my own safe and accountable firearms ownership and usage proposal, that's gun control. The link is below. I will see about somehow getting it into the chat, maybe at the end after I end the recording, but the link is there. And so back to our presenters. So what I'd like to do is just give a couple more minutes to Kate, Braeden, Michael, Jenica, and Anne for the benefit of those people who joined partway through the presentation. Kate and Braeden, you might want to just recap what you talked about and give any final compelling arguments why people should vote for your proposal. And at the same time, if people have questions, we'll just spend some time going through them. I'm going to officially end the recording in the meeting after a few minutes, but I am going to continue the meeting so we don't have to end the conversation right away. But Kate, if you'd like, do you have any final remarks to the audience?
Yes, okay, for the sake of people who joined late, there's no law in Canada requiring that any housing be accessible. And Statistics Canada has reported in 2017 that 22% of Canadians have a disability. I'm sure this does not include seniors who tend to identify with however they've been through their life. So if they've been able-bodied when they were younger, they don't see themselves as having a disability when they get older. And people forget that children are either born or acquire a disability too. And I just think it's terrible and heartbreaking to see what happens to kids who are isolated because they cannot visit their friends, and families are thrown into turmoil when a family member suddenly needs to have an accessible home that's not available at all. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars. The older retired librarian that I mentioned before spent about $40,000 just to make her condo accessible. I spent $18,000, was lucky I had it saved, to take out a bathtub, put in a shower that you still have to step over a 5-inch curb because I'm in an old condo, and to take out the linen closet and put in a stacked washer and dryer. That's all I did. $18,000. But if that had been included from the time the building was built, it wouldn't have cost any more at all, because when you do it from the planning stage, it doesn't take any more space. It's how you lay out the space that matters, and it doesn't cost any more for apartments. For houses, it can be slightly more. There's a really good CMHC report about this, which is where I got that information. People don't stop to think that they could acquire a disability. We can have a heart attack, a stroke, be hit by a truck, like some people I've met, get MS. I know a young woman who's just in her 40s, and her MS has progressed so rapidly, she can hardly speak. She can't even have enough control over her hands to use her cell phone. She has just been moved to long-term care. This is appalling for someone that young, so bright and a fabulous person, and she has this extreme disability. And if she had been able to have an accessible apartment, which she didn't, it was terrible. She couldn't even wash her hair. Maybe she could have had enough help in the house, and her roommate might not have burned out. Maybe she could have stayed living independently longer, but that's just not possible. In Ontario, the help isn't there and the accessible housing isn't there. So in Ontario, the building code only requires that 15% of units in new buildings be visitable. You can come in and have a cup of tea and use the washroom. That's it. So we have to have all new apartments and condos, we're going for right now, multi-unit housing, every unit be accessible. Otherwise, we're never going to catch up with the 22% year over year who have a disability. And then remember, one thing I didn't mention before is there are more people over the age of 65 now in Canada than there are under the age of 14. So we're getting older, and I hate when people talk about the gray tsunami. Like, just stop it and stop worrying about long-term care and the cost of long-term care. Make our housing fully accessible, and we could live on our own much longer.
Absolutely. So Kate, if you don't mind, I'll just cut you off there for a moment so we can get to Braeden and Jenica, Anne, and Michael again. But for those who are very interested, feel free to stay on. I'll keep the meeting running as long as people have something to discuss. Braeden, how about you recap what your proposal was, and if you have any other thoughts that you would want to share?
Yeah, sure. So my policy, achieving housing for all through market regulation and public investment in housing, kind of calls for three things. One is a massive kind of historic investments in the creation, renovation, and regular maintenance of public owned and operated housing. The expropriation or acquisition of land for use as public housing, as well as a kind of host of regulations that include targeted taxation to combat speculation. This could be stuff like, as Michael was alluding to before, speculative taxes or empty homes taxes or capital gains on non-primary residences. So that's kind of what the proposal itself is. Why it works and is complementary for the Green Party is it furthers its primary value of kind of social justice and of providing kind of a basic fundamental human right that, housing is one of our most basic needs. And it's using approaches that are not driven by market forces, which tend to promote profit over actually providing housing that is affordable and accessible. And I wanted to talk about just a couple other things that I forgot to mention during the actual presentation itself. Why I wanted to have a focus on public housing specifically over the term affordable housing is because in Canada, the term affordable housing changes wildly depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So for example, in Toronto, the City of Toronto's official definition of affordable housing means at or below average market value, which, if you know anything about Toronto, is certainly not affordable. So the specific use of public housing language is important in that regard. Additionally, investing in public housing it contributes to a strategy of poverty relief that impacts so many different other areas of life, like crime reduction, and it's kind of a matter of public health. There's huge crisis of mental health that is related to housing precarity. And so to make sure that our society is as healthy as it can be, we need to also consider where we live as a part of that.
Great, thanks, Braeden. And Michael, Jenica, and Anne, even though you were the last presentation, a quick recap for everyone and any other thoughts that you might have?
Do you want to
Thank
go ahead,
you,
Michael?
Okay, yeah, I'll start. I'll just say that, I opened my presentation by saying that Green Party is seen as the environmental champion of Canadians. And some of the party's biggest moves are or focuses on climate change and the biodiversity crisis. And I just want to say that both of these things are intimately related to how we've been abusing our forest lands in this country. And that's why we put together the proposal we did, because we know that there are alternative ways of managing the forest lands, and the ecoforestry principles and practices is the way. And if I could just read from you, Kathy Code is on the thing here. Kathy is one of the members of the Ecoforestry Institute Society in British Columbia, and their website gives an explanation of ecoforestry. So I'll just, because not everybody's familiar with that term and what it actually entails. So I'll just quickly read something from their website, which is ecoforestry.ca for anybody interested.
At Wildwood.
Yeah. So it says ecoforestry is a forest management practice that maintains or restores natural ecosystem richness, complexity, and resiliency, while providing for ecologically appropriate levels of harvest. Then it defines ecological integrity as the state of being whole, entire, undiminished, and fully functional. And that ecological integrity is the bottom line and the most important goal of management. Otherwise, there can be no true sustainability of any kind, including the economics of timber harvesting, because we just can't keep doing what we've done. We've mined the ore body. It's gone. It's almost gone. So we just ask that you keep that in mind, and we hope the party adopts this proposal to move us forward in our championship and of the broad environmental issues that we face as Canadians. So Anne or Jenica, I invite you to add any comments.
Well, I'm looking forward to Anne's wrap up, as well as I want to introduce Kathy Code. She is also the media representative and the representative of the legal team for Fairy Creek. And Kathy is invited to speak regularly at the rallies, defending rallies. And yesterday she was a guest speaker at Sonia Firstenau's Shawnigan Lake picnic for her constituents. And I'd also like to introduce Amalia Shellhorn. Amalia, you're the creative lady who created theater Dancing Log, aren't you? Are you the lady?
I did a dance called Dance for the Ancient Forest that we presented a few times at the legislature. The first time was with almost 40 dancers. But more recently, I'm one of the most recent arrestees at Fairy Creek. So yes, I've been up at the blockade several times now. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
We'd also like to just recognize Kim Hughes. We recognize your name as you're one of the people that endorsed our proposal when we first submitted it to the Green Party. So thank you for that.
And
Yes.
my husband's here with me, Paul Chorney. He endorsed it as well for you.
Thank you. That was, we
you.
got it in 1 minute before closing time, and thanks to you
Well,
So
Paul
we,
is a U of T graduate. He graduated in forestry in what year, Paul?
That would have been 94.
94. So
Wow.
this
oh, great.
long been an area of deep, deep-seated concern for him, watching the deforestation and the terrible practices in BC. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
thanks, Paul.
I'd like to just close up with it. What I would say is that I don't think there's anything that the BC, certainly in BC, that the Green Party could do that would get them more followers than really taking on what's happening in the forests. I think that we're seeing everywhere the rage. Funny enough, I hadn't heard this before. I'm sure some of you have, but they've been calling it organized crime. What's going on? I think that's so funny, but I think that what we're looking at is we have to have a transformation internally where we really start to say we've got to turn the ship around, and we've got to look after our forests. We've got to look after our forests, and that I know there would be so much will behind that. There would be so many people would stand up. Well, was like you were saying, Amalia, you're one of the people who have been put into jail or whatever it is, I think it's fantastic what we're doing. And Fairy Creek is being listened to all over the world. I got a call from someone in Scotland, a friend of mine, who said, "Oh my God, what's this Fairy Creek?" I think the fairies, they are actually trying to help us on this one. So I'm very hopeful, and the conservation communities is a way that can help people who own these properties to still make money on their forests, but to do it in a way that just allows for a very small conservation community. I personally live in one of those, and it's fantastic to live with the animals. What's that illness? I can't remember what they call it now. Is it nature deprivation? And that, there is a loneliness that when you don't have a connection with nature, that it creates a loneliness. And we're seeing it everywhere. So much unhappiness, and kids who live here, we have almost no suicide in our little area because they're out kayaking or walking or hiking or doing something. So that's it, just very hopeful that we will take on our forests as, and funny enough, Kate, to tell you that in our proposal for our conservation communities, all of them are doing exactly what you're looking for.
Fantastic. Great way to end this presentation. We are running about 15 minutes past our scheduled time, but we also started 15 minutes late. So for all of those in attendance, live attendance right now, I'd like to thank you for your engagement and for coming out. Should this recording be posted online to the viewer watching this down in the future, thank you for taking your time to watch this. And for the purpose of this meeting, I'm just going to say goodbye and end the recording, but this meeting will continue. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. And I'm on my way to, I've got a meeting in 2 minutes.
Okay, take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
I'd like to thank Nick. Nick, you really, really helped us so much to organize this with your excellent follow-up. And let's applaud Nick.
Oh, thank you.
You rescued us, Nick.
I haven't stopped recording, so thanks for recording the compliment. I will stop recording right now, though. Thank you very much.